Good morning. Today is Thursday, August 10th, 2023. People often make fun of economists. I don't understand why. After all, economists have correctly predicted 10 of the last 5 recessions. Today, I'd like to speak about economic theory, because economic theory is at the heart of this week's Torah portion, the parsha of Re'eh, and it is also at the heart of Judaism, though perhaps not how you might imagine. So several times in the Torah, God prohibits the Jewish people from charging interest on any loan between one Jewish person and another. It seems like a strange requirement because there is no logical difference between charging you for the use of my car or the use of my house or the use of my ox, all of which is perfectly permitted. I can rent out anything that belongs to me. Why can't I rent out the use of my money? That's what a loan is. I give it to you to use, and you pay me for using something that belongs to me. It's perfectly logical. And the same question applies to a mitzvah in this week's Torah portion, which we discussed just a couple of days ago, when one Jewish person lends money to another Jewish person, and the Shemitah year comes and the loan is due before the end of the Shemitah year. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, this week's Torah portion, of hashmatas ksafim, the release of debts. The debt's wiped out, don't have to pay it back. How can it be that I lent money to someone, even if it's without interest, and then they don't pay me back at all? What kind of economic sense does that make? How can any Jewish business person survive if they're required to lend money to other Jews, not receive interest, and every 7 years give up on collecting the debt altogether? So, as I mentioned briefly earlier, concerning Shemitah, the release of debts, there's a document called Prisbol. Concerning loans, there's another document called Heter Iska. So let's leave those two things to the side for now. Let's just concentrate on God. How do these two mitzvos make sense? And why is it that I assert that this is at the heart of Judaism? So the Talmud explains that some people have more material possessions and some people have less because God wants us to constantly be involved in helping others. Helping others is the foundation of the world. Famous verse in Tehillim and Psalms, Olam ki amarti, because I said, says God, I said, Olam chesed yibana. The world was created to be based on kindness, on compassion, on helping others. God wants us to be the kind of people who work to correct the economic imbalances in society. That's our job. About 850 years ago, the Rambam Maimonides taught that the greatest help for someone who is in need is not tzedakah. It's not a handout, but it's an interest-free loan to help them start their own business to support themselves. Even if sometimes you may not be able or allowed to collect the debt that you made on that loan. But here's the crucial point. This is an element of Jewish ethics. It's also an element of faith. Everything that we have comes from God. God put possessions into our domain in order for us to do what God wants, which is to use it to help others. But this is not just a question of ethics. this is also sound economic theory. Dr. Meir Tamari is an economist and one of the world's experts on economics and Jewish law. I have the privilege of knowing him personally, and I recommend highly all of the books that he has written. He's an amazing scholar and an incredible person. So he writes that charity, the way we normally think of charity for those in need, is terribly inefficient from an economic point of view. Now, don't get me wrong. It's still important and necessary when it is needed. But it is much more efficient for society to prevent poverty. It costs much less to society to prevent poverty, getting people jobs, for example. That costs much less than providing for those who are impoverished. And that's not just sound economic theory. That is what the Torah says will be the result of lending without interest and canceling debts in the Shemitah year. The Torah says in this week's Torah portion, Efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyon, there will be no poverty. Of course, Rashi adds, if we fulfill all of these mitzvos completely and correctly, there will be no poverty. Because it's just sound economic theory. And Dr. Meir Tamari points out a remarkable example of this, one of the great economic phenomenon of modern Jewish history is the rebuilding of Jewish wealth in North America after Jews immigrated from Europe, mostly Eastern Europe, and from Sephardic countries. There was the widespread use in Jewish communities then, and it's active today, of free loan societies. The generation of Jews who immigrated to the New World, most of them were impoverished when they arrived. Some of your parents, or grandparents, or great-grandparents. An abnormally large number of them went on to become very successful financially. Much unlike almost every other group who immigrated in large numbers, who usually, in the history of the world, remain in poverty for several generations. Many of these Jewish immigrants were helped at the beginning by interest-free loans from relatives and free loan societies. So economically, it works. It works to improve the wealth of society, which benefits everyone. But what it requires is for each individual to think not just about what is best for me in the short term. Of course, in the short term, what's best for me is to collect all of my debts and to use my capital to earn profit. That's in the short term. But if I would think about what is best for me in the long term and for all of society in the short term and the long term, then I would realize to prevent poverty through these two mechanisms and others that the Torah has, but through these two mechanisms of interest-free loans and canceling debts, this helps prevent poverty and helps others to help themselves. There's a famous story. There was a great Hasidic master who used to teach his students that everything in God's creation has a positive purpose. And even if it appears to you that it's negative, there is a way in which it's positive. So one of his students asked him, okay, if that's true, what about apicorsis? What about heresy? To deny God's existence. I mean, that's a terrible sin. It's wrong. It's terrible. What redeeming feature is there? What constructive purpose is there to apikorsis, to being a heretic? And the Rebbe explained, when you confront another who is in need, you should imagine that there is no God to help, but you alone have to meet that person's needs. Sometimes the way to serve God, ironically, is to imagine there is no God. There is no one else to help but me. This is what interest-free loans and release of debts can accomplish. It's a tremendous experience in faith, in trusting God, alongside tremendous, far-reaching rebalancing of equality within society, closing the gap between wealthy and poor, evening out self-esteem within all sectors of society, and giving an avenue for people in need to escape the cycle of poverty. That's when economics is at the heart of Judaism. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.